I'm now joined on the line by Jim Bully, editor at Korea Chungang Daily, who has arrived safely here in Korea after cutting short his tour around the world. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
Very good. I'm glad that you arrived safely back here in Korea. You arrived here after spending some days in the the UK rather. Could you first walk us through about the procedure that you went through when you arrived at Incheon International Airport, the higher screening and maybe quarantine measures as well?
Yeah, so the process really starts when you're on the plane. At the start of the journey, we were given all the normal customs paperwork, but then also two different quarantine-related forms, which asked us about symptoms and about our where we'd been. And then when we got off the plane, the first thing you do is join a queue where they made sure that you downloaded not one but two different government apps that are used to track the symptoms. And then you go through the first quarantine measure where you hand over those forms and they take your temperature. And then again, confirm you've downloaded those apps. And then after that, you go through and you speak to a government official. This is it's worth mentioning that I had no temperature or symptoms. The process, I think, is different. This is sort of if you're green-lighted the whole way through. So then we went through and spoke to a government official who, again, checks that you've downloaded all the apps, that you understand that anyone entering the country at that time from Europe, now from anywhere, has to self-quarantine. And then he gives you the paperwork that explains how that's done. And then you pass through the airport as normal. You can go down to pick up your baggage, and then you exit normally through customs. Now, the only difference is that if you are a foreign resident or a foreign tourist, then when you go through the first stage, you'll be given a lanyard, with the Incheon Airport logo on it, just a basic lanyard. And then as you go out of customs and enter the country past the nothing to declare section, if you have that lanyard on, then there are, army officials around who are being used to kind of police this. And they'll flag those people down. And if they have nowhere to go in Korea with family members, or at least that was the case when I went through, then you'll then get taken to either be tested then or taken to a facility. But because as a permanent resident with family in Korea, that didn't apply to me, they then took the lanyard off, and we're free to go. And the government is providing some forms of transport specifically for people who've just arrived in the country. There are train carriages for people isolating. But we didn't fancy that because the problem is obviously those train carriages are for everyone. You don't get a train carriage per person. And we are entering the country having been in lockdown in the UK. The most dangerous part of our journey in terms of exposure was the journey. Mm-hmm. We weren't in any way exposed in the UK, and we're not now in Korea. So we got picked up and made our own way back because that gave us the least exposure possible. And then as soon as you're back, you are then on the government radar that you need to be in your house. And in fact, we even got a phone call from our local district office whilst we were still en route from the airport asking why we weren't in our house, because once you're logged into those apps and everything's registered, then it immediately pings when your GPS isn't at home, even though we haven't had time to get there.
I am curious, though, Jim. Once you say that you have someone picking you up, or you've planned your own sort of personal transportation to get you into the city and to your residence, do they check that, or can you just say it and then you're off on your way?
They don't check it. Obviously, that's preferable because that limits your exposure completely.
Right.
But they don't police it. I know that if you're a foreigner who enters the country, I know this from third-hand accounts, that if you entered the country and you were tested there and then, and maybe you were showing some sort of symptoms, and then you're held until a family member comes to pick you up, in that scenario, the family member has to agree to be isolated as well for the 2 weeks.
Okay.
So they're then on the apps and everything as well.
Right. Since you were traveling around the world, again, our regular listeners will know that you had to cut that sort of worldwide trip short because of the COVID-19 outbreak. You had the experience of entering the US, the UK, and then Korea as well. So this experience that you described coming into Korea, would you say it's quite similar or very different from that you experienced in the US and UK?
Very different. So 3 weeks ago today, we were in Costa Rica. 2 weeks ago, we were in New York. And a week ago, we were in the UK. Mm-hmm. During that time, we've passed through the international borders of Costa Rica, Mexico, Cuba, Miami and New York and London, and no other place anywhere in the world have we even had our temperature taken.
Right.
In fact, in the UK, even though my wife was traveling on her Korean passport, we were able to use the e-passport gates. We didn't even speak to a single human entering the country. And this was, less than 2 weeks ago when this was very much a global pandemic already. Mm-hmm. And in Korea, one thing I didn't mention is that even long-term foreign residents like me can no longer use the e-passport gates. They have to go through and talk to a person.
Okay. But when we talked to you last, a week ago, when you were in the UK and the country was under sort of lockdown, that's a different situation. Do you think the entry procedures have been changed since then when you want to enter the UK?
I mean, I'd like to think they have, but we only arrived 2 days before the lockdown was in place. They'd already closed bars and pubs. They'd already limited movement. You would like to think that would have started at the border. Hopefully now they have. The UK response has typically been, a little bit slower than it needed to be.
Right.
And so hopefully, now they've caught up with those kind of things. But it's difficult to imagine. There's certainly nothing in place like the apps that we have running the show in Korea, mm-hmm. In the UK or the US. And I think they'd struggle if they wanted to, because people would consider them too invasive.
Do you think those apps, those 2 apps that you've installed, and I understand you probably get regular calls from either the office or some other authorities checking on your condition. Do you think that's enough to sort of keep an eye on people who might be maybe not following those self-quarantine measures?
I think it's difficult to know. I think it's difficult how you would break it. So you're being monitored by both the local district, the government, and also the hospital where you get tested. And they all check in on you independent of each other, and they don't know, there is a bit of a duplication there. You get phone calls sort of 2 or 3 times a day, and they don't know that the other person's already checked. There's 2 different apps you're using, which use GPS positioning, and people do come around to your house randomly to check that you're there. Mm-hmm. And at some point during that process, obviously not at the start, but at some point, if you live in an apartment building, then the managers of the apartment building are going to realize what's going on as well.
Right.
So, and I think that they're also going to start policing it, right? Mm. If they suddenly realize that you're popping out to the shops or something.
Mm. Have you also been tested, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone self-isolating has to test. You have 3 days from entering the country with which to get tested. Mm-hmm. This was before Seoul introduced its measures, so I'm not sure if that's changed.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize is that your 14 days don't start until you've done that. So it's in your interest. Mm-hmm. So we got tested 8 a.m. on the first day.
And you got the results back?
We got the results back that same day. We both tested negative, and we got the results back by 7 p.m., I think.
That is great to hear. Well, I know you still have some days left in your quarantine, and hopefully we'll check back with you next week to see how your life is going under quarantine. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.